Well, the time is just gone 8 minutes to 9 a.m. as we head towards news hour at 9 o'clock. Yesterday, we spoke to the grandson of the late Imam Abdullah Haron, rahimahullah, to get an update on the inquest. And we know at this point in time, closing arguments that have been made at the inquest. And this morning, we are joined by the son of the late, respected, the Honorable Imam Abdullah Haron, rahimahullah, Professor Muhammed Haron. Professor Muhammad, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and thank you for having me.
Yes, Jazakallah. And as we continue providing coverage, and when the inquest had basically started, and we've got now to a point, Professor, where closing arguments have been made. And I'm sure just looking back at this inquest, it shed a lot more light, and a lot more information must have come to the fore throughout this inquest.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think, of course, the closing arguments were just the wrap up of what happened during November, and of course, what we were privy to this time round, though, is to what extent and how the lawyers that represent our family engage with the material that was presented then. And so they broke down sort of each segment or different segments related to the inquest. They looked at the witness evidence, and for example, the Mr. Berger, who was one of the witnesses and who had been the warden in Maitland Police Station. So the lawyers were able to look at whatever he had presented and basically highlighted to what extent he had committed perjury in the process. Though he tried to be forthcoming, he also was somewhat cagey in certain respects. So that, as an example, just demonstrate to what extent they tried to show that the evidence, despite even him being around, they still very much a problem in terms of wanting to make known the whole truth. So, of course, apart from the and of course, going back to the inquest of 1970, they sort of scanned each and every line and each and every statement that was made and demonstrated to what extent all of these were done to basically cover up whatever they could cover up. But of course, in forensic linguistics, one can unpack sort of many of these things. And the same with forensic medicine, as we had heard Dr. Mulefe making her presentation, as well as Dr. Naidu, as well as the aeronautical engineer. Each one of them basically brought to the fore aspects that showed that whatever was presented in 1970 at that inquest basically were turned on their heads. The fall of the staircase story, the other sort of arguments that they put forward. So, yeah, I think the our lawyers, Howard Vani and Naifa Khan and company, were able to do quite a sterling job in doing this. So we are grateful for their analyses, and of course, though it's not closing our own situation, so to speak, but I think it brings some sort of closure for us as a family.
Yes, I agree with you, Prof. One can never get total closure on these matters. And in the absence of many other witnesses who are no more, and you mentioned Johannes Berger, who was basically, I think, the last remaining witness as being the warden. And at the same time, it's amazing that with the type of expertise you spoke about Dr. Naidu, and you spoke about the other forensic evidence that had come through, evidence through experts, who could go back, who could basically unpack what had happened scientifically, and it could be proven beyond any shadow of doubt as to what has happened. And I think that is encouraging to note that a lot more clarity was actually obtained. And this is also important for the family that all this clarity had actually come out. And just to take us through the closing arguments, what were some of the key issues that actually came out in the closing argument?
Okay, just before, if you would allow me, I just want to comment just before we forget this one. There's a group of 13 Turkish lawyers who joined us from Istanbul. They belong to the Istanbul Bar Association number two, and they came to show their solidarity with us. And I think that in itself was heartening. Here we have so-called outsiders who basically who were following this inquest and who were inspired by the translation or translated text of the killing of the Imam by Bani Desa and Kadaf Mani that was published way back in 1978. So early 1980s, they themselves went through certain encounters with the state and were very much touched by what they had read in this book. So that in itself for us was really a welcome, and of course words cannot express to what extent we were elated to have had them. Coming back to your point, I think like we had recommended, I think that now that there has been ample proof that our father was brutally tortured, because even in the very last period from the 19th of September right up to the 27th, of course, very little was known about him. Of course, he had been taken away for 3 days between 17th and 19th. And up to now, even our lawyers were trying to scrounge around to what extent they can find bits of evidence about those particular days, but none has so far been on the cards. But be that as it may, I think the period then from 19th to 27th, uh, the torture, from our understanding, became more and more intense, and this was partly also in the evidence that was given by individuals such as Dr. Malefe and Dr. Naidu. Of course, talking about coloring of bruises on one's body, one could see those that were fresh, those were less fresh, those that were done at the earlier stage. So all of these traumatic sort of, I mean, basically highlighted, underscored to what extent they were able to get to the details of what had happened. But during that period, we also could not send food or send clothes as a family. And of course, it's partly to do with their cover ups, because one of the notions are maybe he was already killed a day or two before. Of course, in a sense, or rather, punished to such a point that by the time it came to the 27th, of course, they just could not extract whatever they wanted to from our father. But besides me, I think as a result of the evidence and the new thoughts that came to mind, of course, that were presented, I think this is where our recommendations are important. Of course, inquests are sort of limited or restricted in just producing evidence, but not to take things forward. Our feelings have been that, firstly, that those who have been involved, of course, they all died. They must be stripped of their titles. In other words, they must be given no recognition for who they were as such. Two, of course, is also that they must be named and shamed. In other words, it must be publicized. These were the people who murdered this detainee or these detainees, and in this case, of course, my father. And of course, the third issue is that the impact their lives had on their families. And I'm sure that they get pension, unlike many other families who basically struggle to get pension, being bona fide South African citizens. These families still continue to enjoy some of these, and we argue that their pension should also be taken away, partly because they were party to supporting their breadwinner to do the dastardly deeds that they did. So yeah, these are just sort of some of the thoughts that just come to mind.
Well, Jazakallah for that, Prof. Uh, in fact, what we will do is I see that there has been a bit of a freeze as far as the camera for your
Oh, okay.
time. We certainly will follow developments as we have done from the beginning of the inquest, Alhamdulillah, and we've got to the stage now where we've now got a clear picture on the closing argument. So, inshallah, we will touch base from time to time as we get a lot more information
Inshallah.
and news surfaces. So, for now, we wish you well, and we thank you once again for your time,
Shukran.
as always, and we wish you and the family well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran for the opportunity.
Well, it was Professor Muhammed Haron was us on the closing arguments on the Imam Abdullah Haron inquest, and with that, we're heading straight for the news.